The notice had been tacked to the side of the general store in Salt Branch for nearly 3 weeks before she saw it. Wind had curled the edges and dust had dulled the ink, but the words remained: cook needed, good pay, room included. No QSDIONS. Lonely Prairie Ranch, 18 miles south. Ask for Gideon Rourke. She read it twice while her sons shifted in the wagon seat, sun in their eyes. The youngest, Samuel, coughed once into his sleeve. The older boy, Elias, only watched her, waiting for her to speak. She didn't, not then. Her name was Mabel Quinn, 32, widowed once by cholera, twice by debt. The last time the sheriff took the mule and the last of the dry corn while her husband's grave was still soft in the ground. That was 6 months ago. Since then she'd moved westward by inches, cooking for wagon trains or trading sewing for board. She had no money left, but she still had her hands and her boys. That night, in a room above the stables, she stared at the ceiling while the wind clawed against the shutters. She considered what it meant to bring two boys to the edge of nowhere. To answer a stranger's note like a moth chasing light. She wondered what kind of man posted for a cook with no questions. What kind of man called himself lonely in the open. At dawn, they rode south. The land fell away into long hills and wind-hollowed valleys, sparse with bluestem and rock. Sage perfumed the dry air. Coyotes scattered like smoke when the wagon creaked over ridges. There were no roads, just wagon ruts and God's silence. The farther they rode, the more Mabel understood. Whoever this Gideon Rourke was, he did not want to be found by accident. They came on the ranch just before noon. The house stood plain and wide-hipped, 2 stories of old pine and shuttered glass, flanked by a barn and 3 outbuildings. There was a corral, a windmill ticking in the heat, and beyond that, nothing but grass and fence posts running like stitches through the hills. No woman's touch, no flowers, no paint. It looked less like a home and more like a place a man built to outlast grief. She stepped down from the wagon with both boys and knocked. The door opened not to a servant, not to a ranch hand, but to the man himself, Gideon Rourke. He was taller than she expected. Older too, his beard streaked silver, his face tanned deep by wind and years. His eyes were pale, clear as river glass, and when they fell on her, they did not widen in surprise or narrow in judgment. He saw her, he saw the boys, and he stepped back. "You're the cook?" he asked. "I am," she said. He looked at her sons. Elias squared his shoulders like a man. Samuel took her hand, silent. "Those part of the job." "They come where I go," Mabel said. Gideon looked past them, scanning the line of sky and dust. Then he opened the door wider. "All right," he said. "Let's get you settled." That night she cooked for him. He ate alone at the long table while she stood near the hearth, arms folded. The boys ate in the kitchen. No words passed between them but what was needed. After she cleaned, then set the boys to bed in the attic room. Gideon offered no terms, no rules, only pointed to an unused bedroom down the hall and said, "Yours." She shut the door and leaned against it, listening to the wind breathe against the eaves. The walls smelled of dry wood and age. No perfume, no papered frills, a man's house. And now hers too, for however long it lasted. She did not know that in the years to come, that house would bury secrets thicker than stone. That her sons would grow into wolves on this land. That Gideon Rourke, who spoke little and carried more scars than he wore on skin, would come to need her more than any man had ever dared admit needing anything. But for now it was just a job, a widow with 2 sons, a rancher who had lived too long with silence, and a promise hanging unspoken between them, survival whatever it took. The first week passed like a long breath held. Mabel rose before the sun, dressed in the half-dark, and stoked the stove with dead pine. She worked in silence, elbow-deep in flour, smoke curling in the beams overhead. She cooked for 3 men, Gideon and 2 ranch hands, Luke and Tomas. They were quiet men, ranch-burned and hard-bodied, their boots tracking dust through the kitchen. They said ma'am when they passed her, kept their eyes down when the boys were near. Elias took to helping with the horses. No one asked it of him, he just started showing up at the corral at dawn. Gideon watched him once through the slats of the barn wall and said nothing. Samuel stayed close to Mabel's skirts, content to trail her like a shadow, watching how she worked the dough, how she carried hot pans with calloused hands. On the fourth day, she found a pair of boots left by the door. Smaller than Gideon, worn but solid, they fit Elias perfectly. She didn't ask who left them. Neither did he. By the second week, the wind changed. Dust turned bitter and the sky took on that sharp, coppery cast that warned of storm. Mabel knew the air too well not to prepare. She hung damp cloths over the windows. She doubled the bread batch. That night the wind screamed like something wild caught in wire. The boys curled together in their attic bed. She waited by the kitchen lamp while the roof groaned and something loose banged against the far shed. Gideon came in soaked and wind-cut near midnight. He didn't speak, only nodded once, and she poured coffee into a tin cup without a word. He stood at the sink, watching the storm through the dark glass, his coat dripping onto the floor. There was something about the way he held the cup, both hands, like a man trying to hold heat in his bones. She thought of asking then. Why a man lived out here alone? Why no wife's voice echoed in the long halls? Why the bedrooms down the hall smelled of dust and not lavender? But Mabel didn't ask things not offered. The storm broke by morning. The wind died, leaving shredded clouds and air clean as cut stone. The damage was minor. One outbuilding lost its roof. 2 fence lines downed. Gideon and the men rode out early to mend what could be mended. Mabel watched from the porch as they disappeared over the ridge, her hand resting on the doorframe. Elias stood beside her, chewing an apple. He don't say much, the boy said. No, she agreed. You think he's mean. She shook her head. He's watchful, that's different. Elias squinted at the horizon. Maybe he's hiding something. Mabel glanced at him. We all are. 3 days later, a man rode up from the West Trail. Lean, slick-dressed, too clean for cattle work. His coat bore no dust, his teeth were white. He called himself Mr. Avery, said he was looking for Gideon. He owe you something, Mabel asked from the porch. The man smiled too wide. That's between us. Gideon met him by the barn. No handshake, no pleasantries. They talked low and sharp while the sun beat down. Mabel couldn't hear the words, but she saw the line of Gideon's back go rigid. Saw the way Mr. Avery's hand lingered too close to his coat pocket. When Avery left, his horse kicked up gravel like gunfire. Gideon came inside, eyes dark, jaw set. You need something, Mabel asked. He looked at her like he was just now seeing her again, then he shook his head. Lock the doors tonight. Should I be worried? No, he said, just careful. That night Mabel lay awake, fingers resting on the hunting knife under her pillow. The wind was quiet, but the silence felt wrong, stretched too tight. Below, the house creaked with old memory. She thought of the way Gideon had looked at Avery, the way no laughter ever touched his voice, the way he walked the property at dusk, always with his hand near his hip. This wasn't just a lonely ranch. It was a place staked in shadows, and she had stepped straight into its center. By late summer, the grass browned under the sun's glare, and the wind turned restless again. The boys tanned and grew lean. Elias spoke less. He learned to ride, learned to mend tack, learned which snakes to shoot and which to let be. Samuel still clung to Mabel in the mornings, but began slipping away afternoons, drawn by the pasture, the horses, the strange peace that lived between the fences. Gideon never questioned their presence. He never praised either. Just nodded when Elias held his seat through a canter or when Mabel hung venison to cure. He watched them like a man watching fire, not sure if it would warm or burn. The trouble started the day Luke didn't return from checking the northern fence. By sunset, Gideon saddled up. Tomas went with him, rifles slung low. Mabel watched them ride into the gulch beyond the ridge, a tightness in her chest she hadn't felt since the days she waited for news of her husband from the mine. They came back near dusk, but only Gideon rode through the gate. Tomas's horse trailed behind, empty-saddled, soaked in blood. Gideon said nothing as he dismounted. Mabel stood on the porch, arms crossed over her apron. "What happened?" she asked. "Cougar," he said. She didn't believe it, but she didn't press. That night she found her knife again, laid it by the basin, made sure the boys were locked in upstairs. In the days that followed, the ranch shifted. Tomas slept with his boots on. Gideon carried his rifle in the house. No more rides into town, no more easy days. Something unseen had shaken loose, and now the silence was heavier, clinging to the walls like smoke. One morning, Elias came in with blood on his shirt. "Not mine," he said quickly. "Coyote." Gideon entered just after, nodding once. Boys quick, didn't flinch. Mabel didn't speak. She took Elias by the chin and turned his face toward the light, searching for signs he was changing into something she hadn't meant to raise. That night, she sat beside Gideon on the back porch. The stars were fierce, hard-edged above the plain. She held her coffee with both hands. He smoked in silence. "You keep a graveyard here?" she asked finally. He nodded toward the east hill. 5 crosses. "No names. A family. Some." She turned her head. His eyes were on the dark. "What about Luke?" "No grave for him," he said. "Not enough left to bury." She looked down. "I don't like lies." "Neither do I," he said. "But truth's heavier." They sat quiet a long while. The wind stirred the grass. Coyotes cried somewhere far. She said, "You ever been a father?" He didn't answer, but he looked at her then, truly looked. And in his face she saw something close to grief, but older. A thing ground down to dust and regret. 2 days later, men came riding up, not cowhands, not buyers. They wore pistols easy, rode with the kind of confidence born from violence, 3 of them. One had a scar over his lip like a broken seam. Mabel saw Gideon's face when he recognized them. His eyes didn't narrow, they stilled. The man with the scar grinned. "Gideon," he said, "we heard you were playing house." Gideon stood in the yard, hands loose at his sides. "You're trespassing. You gonna shoot us for saying hello?" "I might." The man's grin faded slow. "You've got something that don't belong to you." "I've got a ranch," Gideon said, "and no patience left." The man spat. "This ain't finished." They turned and rode off without another word. Dust swallowed them. Gideon didn't speak the rest of the day. He rode the fence line until dusk, then cleaned his rifle at the table while Mabel scrubbed dishes. She said, "Who were they?" He didn't look up. "Mistakes I haven't paid for yet." That night when she lay down in her bed, she couldn't sleep. The weight of it pressed on her chest, that her boys were now bound to this place. That danger knew where they slept, and that she might have already gone too far to turn back. The next weeks passed under a strange hush. The air held the sharp scent of something coming, like metal before lightning or blood before a killing. The men who'd come and gone left no tracks, but the memory of them settled deep in the soil. Gideon didn't ride into town. Didn't send letters. He took to pacing the ridge every evening, rifle in hand, eyes on the horizon. Tomas kept a shotgun near the bunkhouse door. Mabel pretended not to see it. She cooked, she cleaned, she kept the boys close. Elias started sleeping with a knife under his pillow. Mabel found it one morning when straightening the bed. She didn't scold him, just laid the blade beside his folded shirt and said, "If you're gonna keep it, learn how to use it right." He nodded. One morning, while she hung laundry near the shed, she found Samuel crouched low, watching something move through the grass. "Don't move," he whispered. She followed his gaze. A snake, long and green-gray, coiled half in shadow. Samuel's hand crept toward a stone. Mabel placed her palm over his. "No," she said, "let it be." Later, she sat him on the porch steps and said, "You don't always have to kill the things you fear." Samuel looked up at her, eyes wide, voice small. "What if they try to kill me first?" She had no answer for that. That afternoon, Tomas was shot. He'd ridden out to water the west troughs. They found him slumped over his horse near dusk, blood soaked through his shirt, jaw slack. Still breathing, barely. Gideon carried him into the house, laid him on the long dining table. Mabel boiled water and tore sheets into strips. She worked fast, clean. She'd done it before, once when her youngest was born breech in the wagon, once when a trapper stumbled into camp half frozen with his leg ripped open. But this felt different, more final. "Bullet passed through," she said, hands red, "but he'll fever." "I'll sit with him," Gideon said. "No," she replied. "You have boys to guard, I'll watch him." She stayed up 3 nights. Tomas moaned, thrashed. Once he grabbed her wrist and muttered a name she didn't know. By the 4th day, the fever broke. He lived, weak but breathing. Gideon came to her that evening, stood in the doorway as she cleaned the basin. "You saved him." Mabel didn't turn. "Not finished yet." He stepped closer. "You didn't have to do any of this." "Yes, I did," she said. "We're here now, whatever that means." He watched her a long time. "You could leave, take the boys. You still have the wagon." She turned. "And ride back to what?" He didn't answer. Outside, wind caught the trees, scattering dust like ash. That night, Elias asked if he could keep watch, just an hour, just to be sure. Mabel gave him a lantern and told him where to sit. Gideon came and stood beside the boy in the dark, silent. They didn't speak, just shared the night between them. From then on, Elias stood watch every few nights, not because anyone asked, because he knew the land had teeth. Then came the fire. It started in the west field, too fast to be accidental. Dry grass lit up like paper. By the time they saw the smoke, it was already climbing the hill. They fought it with wet blankets and shovels. Mabel pulled the boys to the creek, soaked them, kept them low. Ash rained like snow. The air burned her lungs. She saw Gideon swinging a shovel like a weapon, black smoke swirling behind him. She saw Tomas, barely upright, dragging a bucket with one arm. The fire ate half the pasture before it died. 2 horses gone, fence charred to stumps. When it was over, they stood blackened and silent in the smoking field. Elias leaned into her side, face streaked, eyes hollow. "Who did this?" he asked. Gideon answered from behind her. "Same men as before." Mabel turned. "Why? What do they want?" Gideon looked at the sky, where the smoke still drifted like ghosts. "They want me to bleed," he said. The next morning he dug something out from the root cellar, a long wooden box. Inside, a Winchester oiled and wrapped in canvas. Mabel hadn't seen him carry it before. He handed it to Elias. "Time you learned," he said. Mabel opened her mouth to object, then shut it. Because the world they lived in didn't care how old a boy was, only whether he could shoot before someone else did. Autumn stripped the trees bare. The mornings came colder, the wind knife-edged. Smoke from the hearths hung low over the house, and the barn creaked in the early hours as if remembering a weight that no longer lived. They rebuilt the fences, repaired what they could. The pasture remained half dead, but the cattle grazed what stubble was left. Gideon said little of the fire. He rode more now, checking the ridge at dawn and dusk, his rifle slung like an old companion. He slept less, ate fast. His beard thickened, his shoulders stiffened. Mabel saw it in the way he moved. Something inside him had locked tight again. Tomas limped through chores with a bandaged side, his breath short. But he lived, and when he saw the boys now, he nodded with something like respect, as though they'd been through the same war and come out blood-bound. Samuel stopped asking when they'd leave. Elias kept the Winchester near. He learned its weight, how to clean it, how to shoot without blinking. Gideon taught him without comment, just gestures, a nod, a word when needed. Mabel watched her son grow tall in those weeks, shoulders squaring out, eyes aging in ways no mother ever wants to see. Then came the letter. It arrived wrapped in oilskin, no stamp, hand-delivered by a boy on a mule who wouldn't say who gave it. Just shoved it at Mabel, then turned and rode off down the trail. She took it inside, dried her hands, slit it open. Inside, in clean script, you were warned, one grave wasn't enough. Leave now, or the next fire takes the house. She showed Gideon that night. He read it once, folded it slow, and tossed it into the fire. "They're bluffing," he said. Mabel stared at the flames. "You sure?" "No," he said, "but I'm finished running." She studied him in the firelight. The man he was now looked nothing like the stranger who'd opened his door that first day. He was carved harder, burned cleaner. He was a man who'd lost everything but the fight. "You don't talk about what you did before this ranch," she said. "There's no point," he replied. "There is if it's going to get my boys killed." He looked at her then, truly looked, and for the first time she saw the edge of something sharp and old in him, something that hadn't dulled with years or regret. "I used to ride with them," he said, "a long time ago, before this place, before I tried to be better." Her mouth went dry. "Outlaws." "Worse," he said. "We took what we wanted, burned what we couldn't carry. Killed anyone who didn't lie down fast enough. And now they want what? Me buried." She said nothing for a long while. The fire cracked. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls like breath on a neck. Then she said, "You should have told me." "I thought I could leave it behind," he said. "Turns out it rides faster than I do." That night she sat awake while the boys slept upstairs. She braided her hair back and stared at the rifle over the hearth. They had lived through too much to be run off. She had bled too much, carried too many graves behind her to bury another. If they wanted this land, they would have to come and take it, by blood or not at all. A week passed. On the seventh night, Elias saw the glint on the ridge, a rifle barrel catching moonlight. He didn't yell. He just slipped into the house, took up the Winchester, and said, "They're here." Gideon moved fast. No panic, no orders wasted. "Tomas, east flank. Mabel, stay low. Lanterns out." Mabel grabbed Samuel and ducked into the stone cellar beneath the floorboards, heart pounding. Elias followed Gideon, rifle firm in his grip. The first shot cracked through the night like a whip, then another. The air filled with smoke and dirt. Horses screamed. Someone shouted from the dark. Mabel pressed Samuel's face to her shoulder. Listened. Two men tried the front. One kicked the door. Another set fire to the porch. A shot rang, then another. Silence. Gideon dragged a man's body into the yard just before dawn. Tomas had a cut across his cheek, but nothing deep. Elias had a bruise along his ribs. He didn't speak. Mabel stepped outside, Samuel clinging behind her. The house stank of smoke, but it stood. The porch was blackened, but the fire hadn't taken. Three men lay dead in the dust. One still clutched a revolver, fingers stiff in rigor. "They'll come again," she said. Gideon nodded. "Next time it'll be all of them." Elias looked up at her, face pale. "We gonna run?" She met his gaze. "No, we're gonna finish what they started." The ground was red before the sun rose. And still the war hadn't come yet, only its teeth. The bodies were buried on the East Hill before the noon heat rose. No prayers, no names, just dirt over blood, the way things ended for men who rode to take what wasn't theirs. Mabel worked silent beside Gideon, sleeves rolled, face streaked. Elias dug with his own hands. Samuel watched from the gate, fingers curled tight around the rail. When it was done, Gideon planted fence posts over the graves. He didn't say why, he didn't need to. They knew it was a message. The next days crawled. The boys stayed close. Gideon kept the horses saddled. Mabel packed provisions like they might have to flee, but she knew deep down they wouldn't. Running only delayed the noose. Better to build the gallows first. Tomas healed fast enough to hold a rifle again. He took watch on the western trail, eyes never still. Mabel started sleeping in shifts, dozing by the fire, knife across her lap. The house became a kind of bunker, quiet, braced, waiting for the next blow. Then, without warning, the blow came. Just past dusk, the sound of hooves, too many for any good reason, tore through the stillness. Dust churned on the horizon. 15, maybe 20 riders, torches, rifles, laughing like hounds before the kill. Samuel screamed from the attic. Gideon stepped into the yard, coat flared, shotgun cradled. Elias followed, rifle across his chest, jaw locked tight. Mabel stepped beside them, her old revolver drawn. She hadn't fired it in years, but her grip was steady. The riders halted 50 yards out. Their leader rode forward, a tall man with a red scarf and a scar down his cheek like a cracked mirror. He grinned wide when he saw Gideon. "Rurk," he called, "still playing farmer. Thought you'd be dead by now." "Thought you'd be smarter," Gideon said. The man's grin soured. "We came for your dirt and your blood. Don't make us work for both." Gideon raised his shotgun, voice even. "You always did talk too much, Jasper." Jasper raised a hand. A single shot cracked from the ridge. One of the riders dropped, screamed once. Silence. Tomas had taken the high ground. That broke the quiet. The gunfight exploded like thunder. Torches flared, bullets split air. Mabel pulled Samuel behind the hearth. Elias fired from the window, steady as a grown man. Gideon moved like a man born in chaos, reloading fast, taking cover, shouting where needed. 2 men broke through the back fence. Mabel shot the first in the chest. The second made it to the porch before Elias cut him down. Smoke burned the eyes. The house shook with each blast. Windows shattered. A torch rolled across the floor. Samuel stomped it out with his coat. Hours felt like lifetimes. By the time dawn broke pale over the hills, only 5 men rode away. One of them had blood trailing from his saddle. None looked back. The yard was red again. 3 bodies lay near the barn. One still burned. Gideon leaned against the post, bleeding from the shoulder. Elias stood beside him, panting, ash on his cheek. Tomas limped from the ridge, rifle held high. Mabel stepped out slow, revolver still warm in her grip. No one spoke. No one smiled, but they were alive, and the ranch still stood. That night Mabel washed Gideon's wound. He winced once, then held still. "You should have warned me they'd come like that," she said. He looked at her, eyes tired. "Would you have stayed?" "Yes," she said, "but I would have been ready." He nodded, eyes dropping. "I thought I could hold it back. That it wouldn't spill into this life." She rinsed the cloth. It always spills, eventually. He watched her hands, the way they worked, efficient, unflinching. "I've buried every man I ever called a friend," he said. "Most of them deserved it." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. He asked, after a long silence, "Do you hate me for bringing this to your door?" "No," she said, wringing the cloth dry. "But I won't let it take what's mine." He smiled, just barely. That night they buried 3 more men on the East Hill. No markers, no words. And when Mabel looked out across the fields, scorched and raw under the moonlight, she didn't see ruin. She saw a line drawn, and behind it, her family, blood-washed but breathing, alive, still standing, waiting for what came next. Winter came early that year. Frost crawled across the windows before November, and the ground hardened like old scars. Snow drifted in slow, thin curtains. Not much at first, just enough to remind them the land would not always bleed, but it would always demand. The grave hill grew quiet beneath its white coat. The fires in the hearth burned longer. The boys coughed less and ate more. The ranch settled into a new rhythm, one shaped by silence, not fear. Watch shifts continued. Rifles stayed near. But the weight pressing against their ribs had eased, if only a little. Elias rode fence lines on his own now, carried the Winchester like it was part of him. He didn't flinch at noises in the dark. He didn't ask questions unless they mattered. Samuel still slept beside the stove, but he laughed more often. Drew shapes in the frost on the window pane. He began to whistle, soft and tuneless, but Mabel held on to it like prayer. They rebuilt what had burned, the porch, the fences, even the shed. Tomas carved new boards with the steadiness of a man who had nothing left to run from. Sometimes he'd speak to the boys about tracking, about signs in the snow, about how to listen when the world turned quiet. He never spoke of what happened that night. He didn't need to. One morning, Mabel found Gideon in the stable, brushing down his stallion. He looked older now, lines deeper, but something had settled in him, not peace, but something close to it. He said, "You kept this place alive." She shrugged. "It was never just yours." "I thought I was building something to outlast me," he said, fingers tightening on the brush. "Turns out I built something that needed others to stand." She leaned against the stall. Nothing worth keeping is held alone. They stood there a long time, no words, just the creak of the wood and the breath of the horse. That evening, snow fell heavy. The boys played in it, shouting, laughing, vanishing into clouds of white before returning flushed and wild-eyed. Mabel watched from the porch, a shawl around her shoulders, eyes bright with something she hadn't let herself feel in years. Hope. Not the naive kind, not the hope of city folk or sermons, but the kind that grows in blood-soaked dirt. Hard, earned, edged with pain. Gideon came beside her, lit his pipe with shaking fingers. He said, "I used to think the worst thing was dying alone." She looked at him, and now. He watched the boys fall into the snow, wrestling, laughing. "Now I think the worst thing is dying without doing right." Mabel's voice was low. "You've done right." He nodded once, trying to anyway. She stepped down into the snow, walked toward the boys, her boots sinking deep. Elias caught her hand, pulled her into the game. Even Samuel tackled her leg, grinning. Behind them, Gideon leaned against the post, pipe smoke curling up into the freezing dark. Tomas appeared with a wool blanket over his shoulders, watching with a faint smile, a shotgun tucked under his arm like a reminder. They were not safe, but they were standing, and the land for now was quiet. No more riders came, no more torches. The hills remained bare and cold, but no longer watching. By spring, the ranch would bloom again. Grass would rise green from the graves, the cattle would calve. Life, brutal and soft all at once, would begin its slow crawl forward. But that night, under snow and stars, the war was done. The widow had come with 2 sons. The rancher had offered a door. Together they built something no fire could take, no bullet could break, family born in blood, forged in silence, alive, still here, still fighting, always.